Hey everyone, this is Manisha. Welcome to this YouTube channel that takes on all sorts of topics related to creating a safe space within our minds and around us, and a host of other topics that are about equipping ourselves to navigate this highly complex and uncertain world. The inspiration behind creating this channel was really to be able to do something meaningful to support um, people around me and myself too, as we in India navigate the second wave of COVID-19 that has brought about immense grief, loss, and fear within our minds. And I think what we need the most right now is a safe space. Um, and hence, this channel is called The Safe Space. Today, I bring to you a conversation with Dr. David Drake. Dr. David Drake is the founder and CEO of the Moment Institute in the US. He is also the founder of narrative coaching and integrative development, both of which are very unique methodologies in the space of personal growth and development. Um, and as someone who's been following and studying David's work for the past 1 year or so, I felt that his approach to inner work is not only very in depth and thorough, but also very organic and practical. And so I thought, given the 40 years of experience that he has with supporting people as they work through transitions, difficult challenges, and change, um, he could help us with certain insights on how can we navigate these difficult emotions um, during this phase. And in the series of videos, he shares his insights and also his experience as someone who's witnessed what the pandemic brought with it. Um, and this is his experience of being through the pandemic and what it brought about in the US.
In the early days here in the States with this, and is one of the struggles we often have is we feel like we shouldn't be afraid. Fear is a good thing, actually. So it keeps us from doing things that might be too dangerous for us, or it causes us to be more prudent or more thoughtful. And so I just encourage people to develop maybe a healthier relationship with fear. That it doesn't have to stop you from everything. It just sort of stops you from things that might be harmful. And so for me, it's like relieving ourselves of the pressure of I shouldn't feel afraid to how can I use my fear to help me. And so if we get caught up in our fear and then we start to panic or do things that maybe are not helpful, then the fear has gotten the best of us, as opposed to, and you know this from our narrative coaching work, fear is just another character in our stories. And sometimes it's a big character. It's, and that's why in the mythologies, they're always like, giant creatures, but so they can be big, but it's just a character in our story. It's that, and part of it is then how can I use my fear to serve me? So like you did yesterday of, oh, I'm feeling a bit, so if I calm my heart down, then my fear doesn't go away. It's just matched now with loving kindness or something that allows you to put it in its place. And it also, I have a teenage daughter who's on a gap year overseas, and she's about to take her first trip to a new country. And so we had this conversation about fear, and I said it's good to be afraid because it helps you avoid certain things, but but also if you are only in the fear, then you don't enjoy your trip. So use it notice when it comes up, when it's helpful to you, and then when it's not helpful to you. Yeah.
What are some ways in which you befriended fear in your life and it served you for, you know, to move forward or explore?
Yeah, so for me, it's been like, I've had some really amazing opportunities to present, like at Harvard and other places. And the fear of like, oh, will I do a good job, and how will this go? And then you just find, like for me, like I play certain favorite songs in my head. I had the great gift of in our line of work, our kids don't often get to see us work. And so they don't understand what we do. And so my daughter was very curious about Boston and college. And so she came along, and so she was in the room when I was doing my workshop. So that was actually very inspiring to me. Like my daughter actually gets to see me do my job. And so I sort of, whatever butterflies I had in the beginning were long gone. Um, and when I've traveled a lot overseas, it helps me kind of navigate really trusting myself to feel like, do I feel afraid because it's new, or do I feel afraid because I have a sixth sense it may not be safe for me? And I stay away from the latter and just get over, deal with the former and say, well, it's just new. It's unknown. That's why I feel a little bit afraid. That's fine. That's why would I expect to not be afraid if I've never done something, right? So it's a very natural human response. And, our part of our role is to, when we keep hijacking ourselves and replaying those stories in our head, then it no longer is a reflection of the reality that we're in. It's a reflection of the story we've told ourselves. And so again, for me, just like you live long enough and bad things happen. You just can't really escape that. And so you start to realize, well, I lived through all that and I survived and I learned a lot. And so it just helps you, and it's helped me in the past, just put things that seem difficult at the time in a perspective. And so the problem with fear is it shrinks our vision to about this big, and all we see is what we imagine we're afraid of. We forget all this other stuff over here, like our resources, our skills, our life history, the fact that this is only one moment in time. Your country's been through hardships like all the rest. This is not the first hardship that India's faced. And it's persevered, and it's proven to be quite successful. And even with some of the stumbling you might have had around your own leadership, like we had here, they're finding their way, and people are stepping up, and and other countries are helping, and so it won't always be like this. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so
yeah,
much. That
yeah.
was powerful to
Mm,
to acknowledge that fear is a normal response in a situation,
yeah,
abnormal situation like this, because this is not what we are designed to
yeah.
go through. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember once being out. I was with some friends, and we were out on a hike in the winter time, and we had checked the weather, and it was supposed to be okay, cold but okay to hike up in the mountains. And it turned out the weather report was all wrong, and so we got all the way up to where we were going, fine, and then this giant storm started coming in, and some of the less experienced people in the group started to panic. And I said, panic will not help you. Actually, it will make you make bad choices, because you'll be in a hurry, or you'll be worried, or you'll be up in your head as opposed to in your feet, which is your feet are what needs to guide you as you're walking. And sure enough, a couple of them slipped in the beginning. And I said, we need to just kind of like find, so we all know how to hike. We all know kind of how to navigate what we're doing. It just is overwhelming because we weren't expecting it. So it's our mind is upset, but our body is fine. So it's, if we stay in our body knows exactly how to get out of this. And there was one point where it was a bit treacherous, because they had a kind of a steel cable. You had to kind of walk along this really narrow ledge, and It was really pretty tricky. I said, but if you get all the way up into your head out of worry, you are more likely to fall because you're not paying attention to what's actually happening. So I said, instead of being in your head, focus on your gloves on the cable. And your only job is just to keep moving your hands on the cable and staying grounded in your body. And so we got through it just fine. And we had to help, we help people to breathe. And the odds of something bad happening were actually quite small. But the anxiety of what might happen causes us again to separate from ourselves, which then ironically makes it more dangerous for us, not less. And so a lot of times when, like for me, when we were, in a particularly difficult period of my life, I just redid part of the inside of my house, and I created a little sanctuary for myself where I wouldn't allow myself to worry about what was going on. I would just go sit there and be quiet and I looked at this beautiful view of the ocean, and I would just sit there and look at the ocean and said, the ocean comes and goes, it comes and goes, and then tomorrow it'll come and go again. And so I knew that no matter how else I might be stressed or worried about what was happening, I could always go sit there and have a place of peace. Yeah, and so my encouragement is, and like, I don't know what the tradition is there, but I know here a lot of people they were so worried they had the news on all the time. I'm like, no, that's the exact opposite of what you want. It's not helping you, and unless there's some kind of immediate emergency in your neighborhood, it's not help you, because they tend to sensationalize things often and make them, and it's not helpful. It doesn't change you. There's nothing you can do with that helps you other than worry. And worry is not very helpful. So find ways to kind of bring more calm to your house and safe spaces where people can be quiet. And things that probably seem childish or simple are actually the exact things that we need. Right.
I
Yeah.
love the idea of, a sanctuary or a Zen
Yeah.
corner or
Yeah.
a sacred space designated for just being with yourself in silence.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it helps you keep it all in perspective.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And it's so interesting how you touched upon the next piece I was about to ask, because
Oh,
the compulsive news checking or the
yeah.
compulsive, oxygen level
Right.
checking, even when you have no symptoms, because fear or anxiety drives that. How do we break that cycle if that's happening to us?
Yeah. Well, so part of it goes back to what we were saying before about just so fear is just a physiological response. It's an emotion that gets triggered by our body when it senses something, and then it gets triggered by our mind, which has convinced our body that something must be there. And so rather than making it a noun, I try to encourage people to make it into a verb. So they can say to themselves, I feel afraid. And then when they feel I'm afraid, then they're having agency over their own feeling. And so what can I do to help myself to not feel so afraid? And then they can start taking, and then even more importantly, is what I'm doing right now helping me feel less afraid, or is it making me more afraid? When fear is a noun, it's a thing out there. It's like, again, it's the giant monster, right? Oh, and I better, and so then I find people become more passive, more, it's easier to fall into a kind of a victim place or a worrisome place because, well, there's fear. And you could put 10 people in the same situation and they'd be on an entire spectrum of whether they feel any fear or not. And so I encourage people when they say, like, I'm afraid, well, what resources could I bring to myself to manage my own feeling, not push the fear away? So the people that, what we call in the States, like first responders, like people in the fire department or the police or the medical people, they feel afraid all the time. they've just learned how to manage their own fear and get their job done. So, I've helped support a couple of crises in my life, just some by choice, some by happenstance, but you just making allowing yourself to just use your fear again to propel you to go do things that are going to help the situation. And I just find that that's really helpful, as opposed to seeing fear as something outside of ourselves. It's just a feeling that we're having. And like all feelings, we can choose what to do with them or not. So, if we try to stop being afraid, we will lose, because as whatever is triggering the fear to varying degrees has some basis in reality. So if to be in India at the moment and not be afraid means you're asleep or dead, frankly. Be afraid. You should be afraid. I mean, if no one was afraid and everybody said, well, I'm just going to go about my day and do nothing, or if the government or the medical system would do nothing, then the whole thing would collapse. That is true. And so you should be afraid. The question then becomes, how can I use this to our advantage? How can I galvanize my neighborhood? How can I help support or bring resources to people that are trying to help us? How do we work with the government to kind of be more proactive, and which it sounds like they are doing now, but and so there's actually a really interesting adrenaline creates these sort of chemicals in our brain, like the adrenaline things that can be used for good or not good. It can wind us up to a place that's destructive or non-constructive, or it can actually propel us to go take action. And so again, it's just like if I'm like, I feel this feeling, then I can be responsible for managing and dealing with my feeling in a way that's going to serve me and perhaps even others.
Yes. There was something very interesting about, how you explained this. So the insight that came to me was that if I say I'm afraid versus I'm experiencing fear, it helps
Yeah.
me create distance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that distance really then helps one make choices as to what to do with that
Yeah.
experience. What is the smallest action that one could
Yeah.
really take as a response
Yeah.
to the information that the
Mm-hmm.
fear is trying to convey. um,
Yeah.
Much like the notifications that come on Outlook, it's like you
Yeah.
either dismiss or you
Yeah.
act upon them. And if you
Yeah.
keep dismissing them, they keep showing up because
Yes.
it's supposed to notify you to take some
Yeah.
action.
Sure.
um, and so you either say, you know come back 2 hours later, or you just do the
Yeah.
update that you're
Yeah.
supposed to do. So
Yeah.
I loved how changing from noun to verb could create that psychological
Yeah.
distance.
Yeah. Could be. And what comes up for me then when you say that is when somebody says, I'm really afraid, I don't know what to do. Well, because all they see is their hand. Like,
Yeah.
well, of course, then what are you going to do about that? You creating that distance, creating that separation. You're not your emotions.
So that was an excerpt of my conversation with Dr. David Drake. I found it very insightful. Hope you too found it insightful. So, my top three insights from the conversation were: number one, taking away the pressure of not feeling fears, or rather, giving yourself the permission to feel fear. My second insight was about working towards creating a healthy relationship with fear, and asking oneself, how can my fear serve me? And let me add others. So, how can my fears serve me and others? And my third insight was creating the psychological distance between ourselves and fear, and acknowledging that it's an experience, and not making it our identity. I would love to hear what were some of your key insights from this conversation. And what are some constructive strategies that you use to engage with your fear and grow through the experience? Would love to leave your comments in the comment section below. Thank you.